I still remember the day I found the notice taped to my front door. My heart sank before I even read it. It was from the HOA Homeowners Association. They were telling me that my Jeep was in violation, not because it was unsafe, not because it was parked illegally, but because it was unsightly and didn't meet the community's aesthetic standards. I stared at the paper, confused. Unsightly? My Jeep? The same vehicle that had been with me through some of the toughest moments of my life? It was dusty, sure. It had scratches and dents. It wasn't a shiny brand new SUV with perfect paint, but it wasn't garbage. It was my Jeep, my battle-worn companion. The notice said I had to fix the appearance issues or face fines, even towing. I felt my chest tighten. It wasn't just a truck, it was a symbol of everything I'd been through. And now, some faceless committee was telling me it didn't belong here, like I didn't belong here. I tried to make sense of it. How could they judge something so quickly? Did they see the mud and dirt and assume I was careless? Did they understand that this Jeep had survived deserts, dust storms, and long, lonely nights? That it had been my shelter and my lifeline during deployment? They saw only the surface. They didn't know the stories behind the dents or the meaning of every scratch. How could they know nothing about what that Jeep had been through? I'm a military veteran, not just someone who served a short tour and moved on, but someone who spent months deployed overseas, far from home, in places most people only hear about on the news. When I returned, I wasn't just coming back to my family or my neighborhood. I was coming back to a whole new world. A world that felt unfamiliar and sometimes unkind. And with me was my Jeep. Not a fancy polished showpiece. No, this Jeep was rugged. It was dusty from miles of rough roads and desert trails. It had dents from narrow escapes and rough terrain. The paint was faded in places, scratched in others. To anyone else, it might have looked like an old beat-up vehicle someone had forgotten to take care of. But to me, it was much more. This Jeep had been my lifeline during deployment. When you're out in a place where everything feels uncertain, that Jeep was more than just metal and wheels. It was shelter from the blazing sun. It was a way to move quickly when danger was near. It was the place where I could sit quietly for a moment and feel some peace in a world full of chaos. Every scratch told a story. Every dent reminded me of a challenge I'd overcome. Every layer of dust was a memory. Long days, cold nights, moments of fear, and moments of hope. It was freedom. It was survival. It was a piece of my past that I held onto tightly, even as the world I came home to kept moving forward. Coming back wasn't easy. Reintegration felt like learning how to live all over again. People didn't always understand what you'd been through. They saw the uniform come off, but they didn't see the weight that stayed behind. My Jeep was one of the few things that connected me to that part of my life. The part I couldn't just forget or leave behind. So when I parked it in my driveway, I didn't see a vehicle that violated any rules. I saw a reminder of my service, a symbol of resilience. I saw home. But the HOA didn't see it that way. To them, it was just an eyesore disrupting the neighborhood's look. They didn't know about the long nights I spent under that hood, fixing it by flashlight. They didn't know how many times I'd leaned against it, tired and aching, thinking about the people I left behind. They saw a dusty, dented Jeep. I was just a face in the crowd to them. After the first notice, I hoped it would end there. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding. Maybe I could fix whatever they thought was wrong. But then, the letters kept coming. More notices slipped under my door, slipped into my mailbox, each one more urgent than the last. If I didn't clean up the Jeep, they warned, fines would start piling up, and if I still refused, they threatened to tow it away without any more warning. I felt like I was being punished for holding on to a part of myself, for trying to keep a piece of my past alive in a place where I was supposed to be safe. It didn't make sense. But it wasn't just the HOA sending those letters. I started hearing whispers in the neighborhood, neighbors talking in low voices when I walked by. Some avoided eye contact altogether. A couple of them even complained openly, right in front of me. One afternoon, while I was washing the Jeep, an older man from down the street stopped. "You know, it really brings down the look of the block," he said. "Maybe you should think about fixing it up or parking it somewhere else." There was no understanding in his tone, no kindness, just judgment. I tried to explain. I told him what the Jeep meant to me, about deployment, the memories, the battles it had been through. But no one seemed to care. The HOA board didn't respond to my emails or calls. When I showed up at their office, they barely acknowledged me. And then there was Linda. She was the chair of the HOA board. Sharp, cold, and unyielding. From the start, she made it clear she saw my Jeep as a problem, nothing more. At meetings, she pushed hard for strict penalties. "This isn't about sentimentality," she said. "It's about maintaining the neighborhood's standards. If we let one vehicle slide, others will follow." Linda seemed to want the Jeep gone, no questions asked. Her words cut deep because they made me feel invisible. Like my story, my service, didn't matter. One evening I received a call from the HOA. They told me the fines were increasing. Soon I'd owe more money than I made in a week. I asked if there was any way to appeal. The answer was no. The silence from the community, the coldness from the HOA, it all added up to a growing weight on my shoulders. I felt like I was fighting a battle I couldn't win. But giving up my Jeep? Giving up that symbol of hope? That wasn't an option. I wondered how it had come to this. How could people be so quick to judge, so quick to punish without even knowing the full story? I wasn't just some careless neighbor with a messy car. I was someone who had sacrificed a lot. Yet, here I was, being told my Jeep didn't belong. I decided I couldn't just sit back and let this happen. I needed to face them, to tell my story in person. So I showed up at the next HOA meeting, hopeful but nervous. I wasn't expecting a miracle, but I wanted them to see me, to understand. I brought with me a small album, photos from deployment, pictures of the Jeep in dusty deserts, battered but standing strong. I explained what the Jeep meant to me, how it kept me safe, how it was a symbol of everything I'd endured and survived. I shared stories of long nights, of hope in the hardest times. I hoped that maybe, just maybe, someone would listen. But the room was cold. Some board members glanced at their phones. Others exchanged quiet whispers. When I finished, there was silence. Then a polite but dismissive clap from a few. Linda, the chair, looked right through me. "We appreciate your service," she said with a tight smile. "But this is about community standards. We cannot make exceptions for personal stories or sentimentality. If we did, the rules would lose all meaning." I tried to press on, to ask if there was any way to compromise. Could I park it in the back? Could I clean it up? Anything. But the answer was always the same. No. No exceptions. No compromises. I left that meeting feeling smaller than ever. The people who were supposed to represent the neighborhood had turned their backs. They cared more about appearances than about what the Jeep and I represented. It was crushing. I felt invisible, unheard. All my hopes to reason, to find understanding, had been shut down. That Jeep wasn't just a vehicle. It was a piece of my heart. And now it felt like the whole neighborhood wanted to rip it away from me. Just when I thought I was completely alone in this fight, something unexpected happened. One afternoon, while I was sitting on my porch feeling defeated, a knock came at the door. It was Tom, a neighbor I barely knew. Quiet, kept to himself mostly. But that day he looked different. There was a kindness in his eyes that I hadn't seen before. He told me he was a veteran too, had served a few tours, just like me, and he understood. Tom said he'd been watching what was happening with the HOA and the Jeep. He said it wasn't right. "You shouldn't have to fight this battle alone," he told me. He suggested something I hadn't seriously considered, going public with my story, sharing it online, maybe even reaching out to the local news. It was scary to think about opening up my life, my memories, to strangers. But Tom made me see it in a new way. If people don't know, he said, they can't stand with you. At first I hesitated. I worried about what people might say, about drawing attention to myself. But more than that, I didn't want my story to be misunderstood, or used as some kind of pity case. I wanted people to understand the Jeep, the memories it carried, and why it mattered. After thinking it over, I decided to write a post. I poured my heart out about my service, the Jeep's significance, and the unfairness of the HOA's actions. I shared photos, stories, and my feelings. When I hit post, I felt a mix of fear and hope. It was a risk, but it was also a chance. Little did I know how far that post would travel, or how many people it would touch. I never expected my simple post to blow up the way it did. Within hours, people started sharing it. Thousands of shares, hundreds of comments pouring in. Veterans reached out, thanking me for sharing the truth. Military families sent messages of support. Even civilians who had no connection to the military began to understand what was happening. The flood of kindness was overwhelming. Strangers offered help, advice, and encouragement. Some shared their own stories of unfair treatment or battles with their HOAs. It became clear that this wasn't just about my Jeep. It was about something bigger, about respect, about standing up for what's right, about honoring sacrifice. Local social media pages picked up the story. Then a community news station contacted me, wanting to do a feature. They came by, listened carefully, and told my story with the care and respect it deserved. Suddenly, the issue wasn't just between me and the HOA anymore. It was out in the open, and people were paying attention. The HOA board started to feel the pressure. Emails flooded their inboxes. Calls from concerned citizens and veterans groups arrived. People demanded answers. How could they threaten to fine and tow a vehicle that represented so much? I heard rumors that Linda and the board were scrambling, trying to figure out how to respond. The neighborhood I had thought was turning its back on me was now rallying around me. It was a strange feeling, both comforting and powerful. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. The Jeep wasn't just a battered vehicle anymore. It was a symbol of resilience, community, and the importance of standing up for what you believe in. The story was bigger than just me or the Jeep. It was a reminder that sometimes, when you share your truth, people will listen. And when enough people listen, change becomes possible. The reaction from the community hit the HOA hard. Suddenly the power dynamic shifted. The aggressive board member Linda, who had pushed the hardest to penalize me and tow my Jeep, resigned quietly. No fanfare, no explanations. Just an abrupt departure that spoke volumes. The rest of the HOA board seemed shaken. After days of silence, they released a public apology. They acknowledged that their approach had been insensitive and lacked understanding of the circumstances. They said they wanted to repair trust with the community and promised to review their policies with more empathy and fairness. It was a complete turnaround from the cold hard stance they had taken before. And then they reached out to me directly. They wanted to meet. They said they wanted to find a compromise. I was cautious. After everything, I wasn't sure if I could trust them. But part of me wanted to believe that maybe this was a chance to heal, between me, the Jeep, and the neighborhood. This wasn't just about a vehicle anymore. It was about respect, about community, and about acknowledging the sacrifices that sometimes go unseen. The fight hadn't just saved my Jeep. It had opened the door for others who might be facing similar battles, feeling invisible or unheard. After the meeting with the HOA, things finally started to change. They agreed to let my Jeep stay in the driveway. Not only that, but they promised to update their policies to be more understanding and inclusive, especially when it came to service members like me and others who might have unique circumstances. It wasn't just about my Jeep anymore. Soon, other veterans and service members in the neighborhood began coming forward. They shared stories of their own struggles, vehicles, equipment, even personal challenges that didn't fit the HOA's rigid rules. And for the first time, they felt heard. They felt safer. Looking back, I realize how powerful it was to speak up, to take what felt like a small personal fight and turn it into something bigger. I thought I was just defending a Jeep, but really, I was standing up for respect, for recognition, and for the right to carry the weight of my story without shame. The Jeep, battered and worn, still sits in my driveway. It's more than a vehicle now. It's a symbol of strength, of resilience, and of the courage it takes to be seen and heard. Sometimes the quietest battles are the hardest, but they matter. And sometimes, standing your ground is the first step toward change. This story wasn't just about a Jeep. It was about honoring service and sacrifice, about recognizing the struggles that don't always show on the surface. It was about not letting silence or ignorance be the final word in a fight for respect. Sometimes, the smallest battles carry the biggest meaning. Standing up for what's right, even when it feels like no one is listening, can change lives. It can bring people together, open eyes, and create real change. If you've ever felt invisible, unheard, or misunderstood, remember this: your story matters. Your voice matters. And sometimes, all it takes is one person speaking out to make a difference. Thank you for listening to this story. If it moved you, please like, comment, and subscribe. Share it with your friends and family. Because sometimes, awareness is the first step to change. Together, we can stand for what's right and make sure no story goes untold.